Welcome everyone to the second lecture. As you will remember, we stopped at thinking about the Orientalist project, and we were reading Gauri Vishwanathan's Masks of Conquest, where she is detailing this prehistory of sorts of English's arrival in a bureaucratic capacity for India, for Indians, and how English becomes the medium of instruction, more importantly. And we can attribute our present today to that uh, enshrinement of English as the medium of instruction. As we were thinking about that, like during Warren Hastings' time, the concerted approach was to look at the Oriental languages, languages like Sanskrit and Arabic. You have scholars like William Jones, Halhead, and Wilkins who are translating Sanskrit texts and trying to understand India through those Sanskrit and uh, Arabic. As I was pointing out in the last class itself, one has to understand that much of this, as Warren Hastings would say, clearly understood that every accumulation of knowledge, and especially such as obtained by social communication with people over whom we exercise a dominion founded on the right of conquest, is useful to the state. It is the gain of humanity, as he would say. It is very important, therefore, to think of this venture through colonial ideology itself. So, colonial ideology in that way pushes for knowledge that can be used for uh, understanding the people, to govern them, have control over them. And obviously, like post-colonialism unpacks much of this kind of a vicious logic that is there in terms of colonial bureaucracy. Many scholars have worked on it. Edward Said's foundational work was very important, and it examined specifically these sites where the British were looking at knowledge as a weapon to subdue and colonize people over the globe. For our purpose, it's very important to remember that Hastings, and these are the early years, as I said, and this is before the 19th century itself. And already there is another push that is there. And if in India, from a very different group of people. And they are the Christian missionaries at this point of time. As I had already mentioned, right, in the last class, the first uh, English text or English's arrival is attributed to Father Thomas Stephens. So already we have a missionary angle to English in India. And where on one side Warren Hastings was promoting Sanskrit and Arabic, the vernaculars, the Oriental languages itself, there was another group known as the Anglicist, which also uh, constituted of many Christian missionaries who were pushing for English as a language to be adopted rather than the colonial government investing its energy in English, in languages like Sanskrit and Arabic. So there are two groups that emerge by the end of 18th century in India. One known as the Orientalists, which is headed by William Jones, who are promoting Sanskrit and Arabic learnings and knowledges, translating texts and taking them back to England which has great influence, by the way. If you read some of the works like Raymond Schwab's The Oriental Renaissance, it will tell you that these translations by the Orientalists had a huge impact in Europe. Europe was mesmerized with many of these texts themselves, and they were taken in by many of these Sanskrit and Arabic texts to see the kind of literature, the metaphysical discourses, the abstract thinking that is there in them. So, that leads to, as Schwab would say, the Oriental Renaissance in Europe at that point of time. So, that is one group, the Orientalists, which is working towards promoting this Oriental knowledge itself. Whereas, on the other hand, there is the Anglicist group, which is interested in pushing for English education in India. Now it's very important to know that both the groups are working for the colonial government and are singularly interested in governance, that how do we govern this country better. So, even though they are focusing and pushing for two different languages, Sanskrit and English, their interests are aligned so far as colonial governance is remains. So, we should therefore think of Orientalists and Anglicists as complementary to each other, as much as we think of them as ends of spectrum in terms of their focus on which language to be promoted in India. But then when it comes to colonial governance, they are complementary to each other. Okay. So, let's move on and see what happens to the fate of Orientalists if the British government initially thought that it was great to learn Sanskrit. How do we end up in a situation in the first half of 19th century, by 1830s, that we have English as the medium of instruction in India itself? How does that change and shift take place? Who are the key players here bring in this kind of a policy? One very important, there are three things that happen here, and to reductively put the history into, there are three things that happen in terms of English's official introduction into India. First thing is that Warren Hastings is impeached. The impeachment of Warren Hastings brings in a very different problem for the British. What happens, and this is where a bit of a historical background is necessary, as we realize that East India Company was ruling over great parts of Bengal and Awadh, there are serious complaints of impropriety, financial irregularity and corruption that comes in for them. The charges are so big to ignore that we have Edmund Burke conducting impeachment trials of Governor General, the then Governor General Warren Hastings, which is a very significant movement of the British Raj itself in India. And partly the reasoning that goes into it is that because the British are too close, and then I draw your attention to what we were initially talking about in the early class, that we rule over them, traffic over them, but then they do not understand our character, we do not penetrate theirs. So, the consequence is we don't have their sympathies, no seat in their affection. So, what Warren Hastings was pushing for, promoting, was a certain kind of proximity to Indians. And one important thing that the British deduce from this kind of impropriety is that there should be not so much of a proximity with the, the natives themselves. It is because of this kind of a proximity that we have now been exposed to this kind of a charge now. Now the British were almost short of saying that because of the natives we have become corrupt, which is one of the big threads in the colonial ideology itself. If you read Thomas Metcalfe's Ideologies of the Raj, one of the prevailing ideas around this time in the colonial ideologies is that the native is a corrupt one. The native is constantly looking for ways to hoodwink the white master. The native is a very cunning fellow. Now, extending that argument, the British Raj starts to think in terms of a certain amount of distance that needs to be had with the native itself. We should not be so proximate to the native, because not only because the native is cunning and we are kind of getting affected by it, or we are probably we were not corrupt by per se, but because of our interactions and such proximity with the native, we are kind of getting we are also getting influenced by them. That is one of the things. The second was that now that the native gets to know that we are corrupt, that fails the entire colonial project itself. The superiority of the white man is then compromised. That compromise then leads to the vulnerability of the foundations of the colonial rule. So, his impeachment, Hastings' impeachment, has important repercussions towards what happens to the fate of Orientalism in India, and then about what happens to English in India. So, first was his impeachment. The second and the third we will elaborate a bit more when we read those individual texts that are foundational to English's official life in India. One by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, which is the letter called the Need for Modern Education, where he urges for modern education to be imparted. Suggestions are that it can be imparted in English, though at no point he explicitly mentions so. But when we read Roy's letter in a bit in our next class, we will focus on that. The third one, the most important one, is Macaulay's Minutes. And when we look at Macaulay's Minutes, it will become very clear to us that how this entire shift from Orientalist, from a promotion of Sanskrit and Arabic in schools and colleges completely shifts towards an instruction in English. So these are the three major kind of historical nodes through which we can understand the shift, that if in the initial years the focus was on Sanskrit and Arabic, on Oriental languages, how in the later years and in a matter of almost like from the foundations from the founding of Royal Asiatic Society to the introduction of English as the medium of instruction, it's hardly 50 years. Within that 50 years of time, we have a change in the policy of the government. The Orientalists are subdued in favor of the Anglicists, and we have English as a medium of instruction in India. So, let us look at what happens post Warren Hastings impeachment. Warren Hastings, uh, as uh, as we are told, is succeeded by Lord Cornwallis, who found himself at the helm of government seriously compromised by financial scandals and deteriorating standards. For this state of affairs, the new Governor General squarely laid the blame on earlier policies of accommodation to the native culture. As I was telling you briefly, Cornwallis now started the what in Metcalfe's terms in Ideologies of the Raj. I would urge anyone who is interested a bit more in colonial history and the ideology to read that book. That it starts a discourse of difference, that there should be a distance and difference between the native and the ruler. So, therefore, what Cornwallis does is that there should be no further abuse that would occur. In the process of working towards this end, Cornwallis evolved a political philosophy that he would believe will be consistent with British commercial aims. His theoretical position was that a good government held together not by men but by political principles, laws, and in those alone rested the political power. The Oriental system, he thought, lacking a strong political tradition. He turned to English principles of governance and jurisprudence. So, he now moves towards English government and jurisprudence. So, there starts the Anglicization of India in that sense. Cornwallis sets the ball rolling about what exactly the English government should do. So, it means that the natives were like excluded from public offices, and Anglo-Indian relations which were built on this idea that we should be interacting with them more during Warren Hastings' time and we should know each other better and all that, now moves towards a different kind of a course of action, which is then about maintaining distance. Maintaining distance, it moves towards a more anglicized version of government. As Cornwallis did not have, and in terms of language policies, as Viswanathan tells us, Cornwallis had no particular interest in either promoting or discouraging Oriental learning. As long as Englishmen were not compelled to go through its studies, his successors did not share his indifference. So, what in other words means is that while Cornwallis was not interested, was kind of indifferent towards the fate of Oriental learning, he was keen that English are not forced to learn these languages. Unlike the previous era where they were kind of pushed to learn these languages, as they had to converse with the local population and also learn to rule them in their own words, in that sense of Warren Hastings. Now Cornwallis is like, Cornwallis maintains an indifference that I am not in favor of it, or I am not going to stop also promoting, stop entirely the promotion of the Oriental languages, but I don't want Englishmen to be pushed to learn these languages. However, his successors were not that indifferent, as Viswanathan tells us. They keep pushing the scheme of Anglicization of the government, and here the government starts believing and moving more towards the Anglicist side. And we are told that, in other words, the Cornwallis system of centralized administration was spurned in favor of one that was more diffuse and operated through a network of hierarchical relationships between British officers at one level and between British and Indians on the other. In order to draw Indians into this bureaucratic structure, it was imperative for British administration to maintain an alliance with those from the traditional ruling class. So what happens with Cornwallis and post Cornwallis is that gradually they also realize that, like, what is the most efficient way to rule India. As I have constantly mentioned, that the entire project, be it Warren Hastings, Cornwallis, or later who will be William Bentinck, the entire process is geared towards maintaining efficiency, how you can efficiently govern this entire tract of land that is there, this huge geographical mass, this new country that they have been able to conquer. So the effort is, how do we do it? If Cornwallis believed in this kind of a centralization, that where the natives were shunned from administrative capacities, the later ones started a different kind of a model where you have the British official at the top, and then you are ruling from there, from the top, through a chain of British and Indian officials. So for that to happen, and it's an economical model because you can't get all the officials from Britain, right? So in order to do that, now you need officials from here, from the native ruling class, right? How do you create their loyalty? That loyalty is a very important thing, that we need to have people who will be loyal to this government, and that scheme of administration now needs something that what in Gramsci's term will be that, like, which will be important to manufacture consent, that they can manufacture consent for the colonial government to continue. And for that, the English education becomes actually a very important method. Here, another very important thing to remember is the Christian missionaries, as I mentioned. The Christian missionaries already were pushing for something very interesting, that they were pushing for English education and conversion also, right? But as a state policy, the British government refused to entertain missionary activities because they were kind of, they understood the sensitive nature of religion in India, and because of that, as it was evident to them by 1857, that religion, the state should stay away from religious activities. So thereby, the Christian missionaries who were pushing for English education and also conversion, the British government tried to find a balance, that the push to provide moral Christian education, which will aid conversion on one hand, and the second thing, which was that you wanted a more efficient, cheaper form of governance, which will be far more easy to maintain and still rule efficiently. Find a very suitable ally in English education in India. This is what Gauri Vishwanathan draws our attention to, that the pressure on the government from the evangelicals and also from a governance point of view tries to find a meeting ground on English itself. As we are told, uh, apart from the effect of thwarting the diffusion of Christian principles and the conflict of interest between commitment to Indian education on one hand and to religious neutrality on the other, rendered the communication of modern knowledge virtually impossible the for the British government. The government had to educate people because that was one of the glorious goals of colonial mission itself, that we are here to enlighten, bring to light people who are stuck in darkness. And but then at the same time, you cannot give in to the principles offered by the evangelicals. So the British government is caught in a quandary, and this impasse is actually broken by English education in India. It's a very interesting situation that is evolving at this point of time, because the British administrators are are thinking about a quick kind of a solution to this. They need to provide modern education because the government is supposed to educate the people. So that's the colonial mission. So please understand the problems that are there in the beginning of 19th century with the colonial administrators, that they are supposed to provide modern education. On the one hand, the Orientalists are arguing that the Oriental languages should be promoted, which is Sanskrit and Arabic. They have treasure troves of knowledge about India and South Asia in general, which will help the colonial mission. Understanding the native, having knowledge about them, which will help us in govern them better. But that strikes a problem because that will also does not find favor with people like Cornwallis and Bentinck, because they think that this much knowledge about the native, or this much proximity to the native, this much traffic with the native, does not benefit us in terms of governance. Rather, it has led to a scenario like the impeachment of Warren Hastings. So they stay away from that. On the other hand, you have the missionaries who are pushing the government that you are here, so therefore you should also help in promoting the cause of Christianity here. So we can promote Christianity and modern knowledge by bringing in Christian moral education to India. But the government does not want to interfere in that itself. So the government is stuck literally in the middle with all these competing forces, where on one end you have the Christian missionary, the evangelical missions, who want the moral education to be imparted in English, modern education that can be done through this kind of a moral Christian instruction. And then on the other hand, you have the Orientalists itself. But then the government does not want to be any more in promotion of the Orientalist causes post Warren Hastings in that sense. So the tension, as Gauri Viswanathan tells us, the tension between increasing involvement in Indian education and enforced non-interference in religion was productively resolved through the introduction of English literature. The English literature then becomes a site for all the solutions here. And I want us to understand what this means. That English literature solves the problems of evangelical mission, Christian moral education, modern education system that was supposed to be imparted by the government, and also the governmental efficiency that they are looking at. So, English literature, the introduction of English as a mode of instruction comes in to resolve all of these problems. Significantly, the direction to this solution was present in the Charter Act itself, which said that a sum of not less than 1 lakh rupees shall be annually applied to the revival and improvement of literature and the encouragement of learned natives of India. This 1 lakh rupees becomes a bone of contention because this is what Ram Mohan Roy's letter will be about, and then also Macaulay's minutes will be about. Macaulay will also again be talking about this 1 lakh rupees. And you can see the vagueness of terminology here, and the vagueness kind of benefits the government in the because then they are free to use this vague phrasing to their own benefit, whichever side they want to. If you see, it says that there is one word, revival and improvement of literature, which will basically mean revival will mean it will be Sanskrit or Arabic. But then also the second half, the encouragement of learned natives of India. That will mean we need modern education. So already we are setting up that Sanskrit cannot impart modern education. Sanskrit or Arabic cannot impart modern education in India. This encouragement of learned natives gives them space to argue about it. And the famous debate ensues between the Anglicists and the Orientalists, where the Orientalists say that if you are going to give this sum of 1 lakh rupees to the Anglicist, which means to English instruction in India, that will mean virtually demolishing the entire indigenous language systems itself. We are not going to promote any indigenous languages, we will not get any knowledge about them. But the Anglicists are thinking about modern education. The Anglicists are pushing for also what we looked at, a bureaucratic efficiency, that how do we have an efficient bureaucracy which will help us govern people. As we were talking about earlier, the British and the Indians, who will hold the bureaucratic structure itself. So when we are looking at English in India, one needs to think about this as the starting point, where this debate between the Orientalists and Anglicists is won by the Anglicists thanks to two major tracts, and one of them we'll read in the next class, which will be Ram Mohan Roy's letter to Lord Amherst, which is called The Need for Modern Education, where Ram Mohan Roy probably is answering to this second part, which is the encouragement of learned natives, and is telling the government that look, this idea of revival and improvement of literature probably does not yield anything to modern Indians. Thereby voicing Indians' urge to step into modernity. This debate and discussion about how do we bring these people to modern ways of the world, one petition from the native side, and then we have the famous assertions, the vicious assertions by Macaulay in his minutes. So, what I am trying to do is to read this history through these three texts, Gauri Vishwanathan, through Ram Mohan Roy, and through Macaulay's minutes, to understand how English came to be the medium of instruction in India. We'll stop here for today, and we'll meet again in our next class, where we'll discuss Ram Mohan Roy's letter, and we'll come back again to Gauri Vishwanathan to think about the official life of English in India. Thank you.